Tanno mitraha sham. So, we are studying this 7th mantra of the 10 Shanti mantras. And the section that we have already completed was the first 2 sentences. My speech is established in my mind is established in my speech, which, as the context of this mantra suggests, as we saw in our earlier discussions, that because this mantra in the Veda comes after the declaration of the quintessential sentence of the Rig Veda, which is this consciousness in me is Brahman, the supreme principle, or is one with consciousness all around me. Consciousness within me is one and indifferent from omnipresent, universal consciousness. Straight away after that, this mantra comes, in which the same Maharshi, the same seer, Mahidasa, the son of Itara, declares here that may my speech be established in my mind, that if I am saying this, if I am saying consciousness is Brahman, then it may be established in my understanding, and my understanding be established in what I am saying. In other words, may I not say something simply because I have heard it, but may I say because I experience it like this. Until I don't experience like this, then let me engage with it. Let me ask questions. Let me protest against it. Let me not accept it. This is what is going to come in the next section of this mantra, when he says that may I merge day and night, which means there the expression will come to it is anusandhana, to engage with it day and night before we actually say it. So, as is the case with all the 4 Mahavakyas, with all the 4 quintessential sentences, they should not be accepted on faith, but they have to be radically criticized, radically analyzed. And only when it starts making sense, first of all, intellectually, and then ultimately experientially, then such declarations should be made. So this section was complete. Now, the next part, Aviravirma Edhi, which is translated as Avihi. Avihi means, O the evident one, O the evident one, become evident for me. O the evident one, become manifest for me, evident for me. It is a strange sentence. O the evident one, become evident for me, become manifest for me. Evident would even be a better word here, because the same word is being used twice. Once as to address the principle as O the evident one, and the second time the same word. So we can use the same word also in English translation, O the evident one, become evident for me. Consciousness somehow is the most evident to us and also the least evident to us. And it is based on this that consciousness is being referred to in this sentence. And in fact, if you would want to summarize the journey of yoga into a single sentence, then this sentence would be tremendously helpful. It makes evident what is the most evident. That is the whole journey of yoga. Yoga doesn't teach us anything new, but it makes us aware of, it gives us the tools to become aware what is already present. The commentators add, by removing the veil of ignorance. And this can be seen through a simple example. When I was traveling with my father on foot back in the late 80s and early 90s through the rural areas of India along the river Ganga, where back then, and even as late as 2006, 2007, my last such on-foot journey, electricity hadn't reached. You had to rely on lanterns, those kerosene lamps. So you buy a little bit kerosene, and at night, that is the only light that you have if you need to go to the toilet or anything. Now, before we used to go to sleep, instead of blowing out the lamp in case you need it at night, we would just sim it down. Is that the correct word? To sim it. Yeah. To sim it down. Sorry? To dim it, yes. Dim, yes. Sim is for the gas. Dim it down, yes. Dim. To dim it down, and then we would sleep just to save kerosene. Then we would fall asleep, and sometimes in the morning, the idea was that at night, then you don't have to find matches and try to find matches in complete darkness. So you just have to increase the light a little bit. But sometimes when I woke up early in the morning, I wasn't sure whether the lamp was burning or had it blown out over the night. It seemed like it had blown out over the night, but what had actually happened is just that a layer of soot had accumulated on the chimney. So it is there. It is there. It is present. It is burning. It is kindled. And yet, its presence is not felt because that soot is there. So then what has to be done is that you have to take out the chimney and take out that glass covering and just clean the soot so that the light can emanate again. And if you look carefully at what Patanjali, how he introduces the 8-limbed path of yoga, Ashtanga Yoga, he is introducing it with the idea that when through the practice of the 8-limbed path of yoga, the impurities get reduced. So the whole practice of Ashtanga Yoga is not to create something new, but simply to make us aware of something. And even the expression that he uses there, jnana diptihi, so that jnana, which means knowledge, its radiance can be increased. So it is there, but simply it's not strong enough to radiating its presence into our lives. So that is why this light is self-evident. You don't need another light to find light. We need light to find other things. If you want to find your watch, your pillow at night, if you want to find your bath, if you want to find your blanket, you need light. But to find that light within the lantern, which has been dimmed and covered with darkness, you don't need to find another light. And that's why it is self-evident. In that sense, it is self-evident. Yet, because it has been covered by the soot of ignorance, an agitated state of mind, a restless state of mind, or a sleepy, confused state of mind, a lazy state of mind, and that's why its presence is not detected. That's all. That is only the problem. So it is self-evident, it is self-luminous. We don't need something else to find it. We just have to remove the veil, the covering, to find it. So in that sense, it is evident, and yet it is not. That is one way of looking at it. Another way of looking at it is that the problem with consciousness is that it makes us aware of sense objects all around us. It makes us aware of what we see, it makes us aware of what we hear, it makes us aware of the sound, it makes us aware of other objects. But in the process, it remains hidden in itself. It remains in the process, it makes evident everything else. And yet, though it is the most evident one, because it is making evident everything else. Whatever is evident to us, if this is evidently present here, then it is evident because I'm conscious of it. If all of us are evidently present in this room, then we know this through consciousness. So what is the instrument through which we know that anything is evident? Then it is consciousness. Through consciousness we know it. So that's why consciousness is closer to anything, closer to us than anything else that becomes evident to us. And therefore what should have been the most evident one, logically, somehow in the process hides itself, gets hidden, and becomes the least evident. Because the moment consciousness enlightens an object, our attention, our awareness always clings that object. And like this, shifts from object to object, instead of turning back on itself and choosing that as an object, which chooses everything else as an object. And this turning back on oneself, instead of running away from oneself, but this turning back on oneself, this is what he means here to make evident that which is the most evident. Somehow, I think the problem why consciousness is, despite the fact that it is supposed to be the most evident, why it is not. The problem to me seems partly that our mind, and because all our senses are related to our mind, we always notice movement. We notice movement easier than something that is not moving. The least something is stable and creates less agitation, creates less movement, in which there is no movement at all, the less movement there is, and the less we notice that. This is true on every level. First of all, we can give several examples. Even if something is present in front of us, but if it is not moving, we fail to notice. But we easily notice something if moving, if it is moving. So for example, the example that can be given, how can a wild cat in fact sneak upon its prey? So how does it do it? By making as less movement and by being as peaceful as possible. Because if a wild cat would straight away walk towards a deer, the deer would notice it and would run away. But if it sneaks very peacefully by creating the least of movement, there is a possibility that the deer might not notice it, or might notice it only when it's too late. Why? Because there is less movement. And that's why also sometimes if a stone is lying on the ground because it is motionless, we stumble upon it. We don't see it because it is lying there motionlessly. A small fly that buzzes in front of our eyes is easier to notice sometimes than a stone or a root protruding from the ground, which is motionlessly lying there on the ground, and that's why fails to be noticed. Why? Because there is lack of movement. So when there is no movement, then it is very difficult. I've seen sometimes, I see this, where I live up there in the forest, because my father, he chose to be up there because it's a very, very silent place. Otherwise, he used to live down here, but the moment when it became very noisy and crowded, he decided to go further up into the mountain, into the forest. So it's very, very peaceful up there. And to retain that peace for which he chose the place, all of us who live with him, 4 or 5 people, we don't speak loudly so that he doesn't feel disturbed. We always just, how would you call it in English? Whisper, yes. We whisper to each other when we communicate. No one speaks loudly. What happens sometimes is that people come to visit him and they enter the room. As they enter the room, they are sometimes so restless. The moment they enter, I'm sitting there and they ask me, where is Prabhuji? He's just sitting there. He's just sitting there. But because he's sitting in complete stillness, they don't. And then I said, because there is no movement there. Movement makes it easier to notice. In fact, to take this example a little bit deeper, just to show why the most evident fails to become the most evident. What was supposed to be the most evident does not remain the most evident because it is completely peaceful. Just to show, just to give examples to make this point. Another study, and this I have only read about this study, that psychologists have used tiny projectors to project the same picture on your retina, exactly the same picture. And it completely follows the saccades of the eyes. Saccades are this constant movement which we make like the bird with our eyes, constantly. Even if we are looking at the same thing, we don't look at it with a straight, fixed gaze, but we look, but we have to move. That's what is called saccade. If you do something against that and project the picture so that the saccade has no influence on it, then that picture vanishes. What is being projected on the eye, that vanishes. You stop seeing it. After a few seconds, you stop seeing it. And that's how psychologists realized that saccade is so important to seeing. This constant movement of the eyes is important. If we would stop this, we would stop seeing. So even if there is no movement in a wall, our eyes have to create that movement so that we can see it. Otherwise, we can't see it. Because the mind requires constant movement. And if you fix it on something, that is the whole idea of the practice of trataka in yoga. To fix one's gaze completely, because the idea is that when the gaze has been completely fixed on a point, the practice is started with fixing on a source of light, but then eventually on a point. When it gets completely fixed on it, the point vanishes altogether. That is the idea of trataka, which then often people ask me, because Patanjali always speaks of fixing one's attention on one object. Eka tattva abhyasa. I use this word again and again because for Patanjali this is fundamental to his practice. Eka tattva abhyasa. Practice to focus one's attention on one essence. Why is it so important to him? And people often ask me that how suddenly from one object Patanjali jumps into objectlessness. How? What is the relationship? This is the relationship. When the mind really has only one object left, then it naturally also loses that object and becomes completely objectless. So the point why I'm speaking of all these examples is simply to show that the mind notices something when there is constant movement. It is programmed to notice movement over stability. And that's why the most peaceful essence, the least moving essence, it constantly is aware of what is changing, constantly aware of what is changing. If you have the same sound, same pitch, you stop hearing it for a while. Wearing your own perfume, after a while you stop noticing it. Others notice it. You enter the room and everybody notices what a strong perfume, but you yourself don't. Because the mind has stopped noticing it. There is no change. When there is no change, it doesn't notice. Then the most evident perfume becomes the least evident to the person wearing it, which is evident to everyone. That becomes the least evident to the person wearing it. This is the problem that is there with our own awareness, with Prajnanam Brahma, that Mahidasa Aitareya has been speaking of. And that's why he is grappling with this problem. He knows that it is the most evident essence of my being, and yet, because of the agitated nature of my mind, because of the restless nature of my mind, I fail to notice it. I notice everything that is changing, but I fail to notice that, the changeless essence within me. That's why the masters say that every thought has two parts, part A, part B. Part B is the changing content, tree, river, mountain, sky, clouds, changing content from thought to thought. And part B, the second part, the part that is closer to us, is consciousness, because consciousness is present within every thought. Every thought is a thought when we are conscious of it. So the light of consciousness is present. But in every thought, we notice that which changes and always fail to notice that which doesn't change, which is the changeless essence, because that light of consciousness does not change from thought to thought. The content changes, the light of consciousness doesn't. That's why the mind, the intellect, notices the changing content, but fails to notice the changeless light of consciousness. This is the problem that is there with the most evident one. So, I hope now that when Mahidasa Aitareya states that, oh, the evident one, become evident for me, we understand what he means by this consciousness which is present closest to us. And also it brings us to another Vedic idea of the masters, when they discourage to search for the truth outside, somewhere outside, but to try to find it within oneself. That's why we have extremely ancient sentences or teachings of the masters, such as found in the Rig Veda, that the Supreme Beloved, about which the wise men and women had heard that it is omnipresent, but when they searched for it and they walked the entire face of the earth, they could not find it. But the moment they entered themselves to search for it, they realized that we are sitting in it, we are present in it. And that's why this idea of entering the inner cave, the cave of the heart, is so central to the Vedic masters. and the practice of yoga is seen as a practical method to enter this Hridaya Guha, this cave of the heart, where this self-evident truth is hidden. Masters make mythological stories out of such ideas so that the idea can be conveyed easily through a story. So there is a story that God decided to play hide and seek with human beings. He wanted to play the game of hide and seek with humanity. And he came to a master and said that I want to play the game of hide and seek with humanity, with humankind. And anyway, they torment me too much with their endless prayers. So I want to hide myself. Tell me where I can hide. I took several suggestions. I asked my angels where to hide, what is the best place to hide in. Some told me that you can hide yourself in the depths of the oceans. Others said that hide yourself on top of mountains. And others even suggested that hide yourself further away, beyond the stars. What, O Master, do you think is the best place for me to hide myself? Then the Master's answer is, what is your suggestion? The Master then answers that I have a better place where they will never ever find you, is the human heart. Hide yourself there, and they will never ever, they are never ever going to look in there. That's the last place they will look after for you. So it's a beautiful small dialogue, but I think it summarizes the very simple truth that this sentence is attempting to make. Now, after the problem has been discovered, the problem is that the most evident, which is the least evident, has to be made once again the most evident. Which means to create an awareness of that presence in everything that we see, in everything that we hear, in everything that we touch. It is the best examples that the masters give is either it's love, whether it is the love of mother to her child or the love of a lover for his or her beloved. Because when there is love, then there is this constant awareness. In whatever the mother is doing, her daily work at home, her mind, her awareness, part of her awareness is always with her child. When somebody is in love, then whatever they do, they are studying, they are cooking, whatever they are doing, the beloved is there. In these two examples, the only problem in these two examples is that in these two examples, the lover and the mother both are aware of something different from themselves. But it has to be taken as an example to be aware of that through which we become aware of everything that we become aware of. So that is the challenge to make the most evident from the least evident. That is the only challenge that is there. And how to overcome this challenge, now again, that's what the next sentence, in the next sentence, the teacher points that out. O speech and mind, be the one that bring wisdom to me. Vedasya, Veda means wisdom. Why the four Vedas? Veda means experiential wisdom. The word for wisdom here, in the Sanskrit word for wisdom, is Veda. Veda means experiential wisdom. And if a certain collection of teachings, a collection of the most ancient teachings on the Indian subcontinent of more than 400, 500, 600 masters, male and female, from all the different levels of the society, from the highest to the lowest level of the society, if their teachings were collected together and are known today as the four Vedas, they are called as such because it contains their experiential wisdom. The wisdom that was rooted in their experience. That's why it is Veda. But the important idea is that the moment I receive it becomes jnana but not vijnana. It might become Veda jnana, the knowledge, second-hand knowledge of Vedas, simply by reading those teachings. It becomes second-hand knowledge. And for that, the Sanskrit word jnana is used. In the Upanishads, in the Gita, this clear distinction, and I repeatedly pointed out, jnana, this distinction between jnana which means knowledge which we acquire through the teachings, and vijnana. Vijnana, the word vijnana, which refers to experiential wisdom. So for it to become experiential wisdom, it has to be rooted in experience. But what is the means? How to reach it? How to acquire it? We have only through two means: speech and mind. These two. And what these two mean is that by speech it is understood the teachings of the Master. So we listen to their teachings, because all they are trying to do through their teachings is to tell us about ourselves, to tell us about the true nature of our being. That's all what they are. So all their teachings somehow direct our awareness, our attention back to ourselves. They push. So when we engage with those teachings, then they push back our awareness back to ourselves. That is what they do. Like a mirror. That's why the first example, that when Indra Virochana went to their teachers to explore themselves, to receive the wisdom about themselves, the first thing that he did was to show them a mirror. That's all what he did. And that's what the masters do. They just show, their teachings are simply like mirrors, because at least when we listen to them, then they create, even if it's a second-hand awareness, but some awareness arises. So that is the first tool that we have, speech, their speech. And that's why even the Vedic wisdom, the Upanishads, all that we are studying here, for example, this mantra, all this is referred to as speech. Even this Vani, Veda Vani, the speech of the Vedas, this Veda Vak, which means speech, the speech of the Vedas, all this is referred to as speech. That is the first tool through which awareness itself arises. And then the second tool is our own mind. By engaging critically analyzing the teachings of the masters, by critically analyzing them, by asking questions again and again, by trying to find answers to those questions, by engaging with their teachings, we have the second tool at hand. So these two tools, speech and mind, you too be the ones that bring wisdom to me. So you both become capable, what it means, that become capable of bringing this wisdom, this awareness to me. But for this, first of all, the speech in which the teachings have been received has to be clarified, and that it has to be very clear. And I think that is what the masters did, because it is their speech, so they put all the effort to make their speech as clear as possible. Patanjali is part of that effort. When we say that Patanjali yogena chittasya padena vajam, through his work on grammar, he clarified speech. He made speech as clear as possible, as refined as possible. So you can believe the kind of speech that was created by yogis, because all other speeches, all other languages are created, all languages are created by common people speaking them. Sanskrit is no exception, but then it was further refined by great yogins such as Patanjali, so that it can convey the truth with clarity without causing too much confusion. Yes, language is a limitation, it will always remain a limitation, but at least something can be done to clarify as much as possible. And Patanjali and many, many grammarians before him, grammar and the revelation of the Vedic wisdom go hand in hand. The most ancient masters of the Vedic traditions are also the most ancient masters in the grammatical, linguistic tradition of Sanskrit. And so, grammar is seen as a very essential part of the Vedas, because that is what gives clarity to language. So from their side, they have done enough to make their speech as clear as possible. Now the effort is on our side, that we have to create clarity in our thinking, in our thoughts, in our concepts, which is a constant enterprise. It cannot be just achieved suddenly, but we have to analyze, we have to think, we have to refine our thinking more and more and more. We have to base our understanding on the previous master's experiences, and then also move ahead, move forward, to refine our understanding of the truth further. It is an ongoing process. But these are the only tools that we have at hand. So his prayer is that they are amazing tools, both of them. Speech as you remember when I spoke about the three manifestations of consciousness? The innermost manifestation of consciousness as this stream of thought, the intermediate, which is manas, the intermediate manifestation of consciousness, which is prana, the life force within the whole body, and then the outermost manifestation of consciousness, which is speech. So out of these three, two, the innermost, the mind, and the outermost, speech, these two are very, very powerful tools. Whatever we are today as developed human beings, we are only because of these two tools. Remove one of these, we wouldn't know where we would have been. We would have been nowhere without. Obviously, both of them are tremendously important. That is how we think and we connect. So the prayer is that let they become the means to bring wisdom to me. And they are not misused. Again, also not misused in saying bad about others. That is a misuse of such a wonderful tool. Or to think harmful thoughts which inflict suffering on others. That is a wastage of such a wonderful tool like the mind. But to use them in such a way so that they bring wisdom, they bring understanding to us. So, quintessentially, what this sentence is saying, O speech and mind, be the ones that bring wisdom to me, which means that may my words and thoughts be clear. May there be clarity. I often wonder that why in modern times certain modern gurus, and you can help me answer this question, and, modern gurus, they discourage from studying too much and from questioning too much. I often wonder, why is it so? As I grew up also and I was studying at the monastery where I did my studies, often monks used to come from outside, and I remember some of them saying to me that, why are you wasting so much of your time on studying? All this study will only just further confuse you. Rather, just do japa, practice meditation, and don't worry too much about all this. And my teachers, at least, they encouraged us asking questions, but I have come across teachers who completely don't ask questions, just believe what I'm saying. So I often wonder from where these two. Yes, one thing is sure, that our speech and our study has limitations, and if we don't assimilate what we study, if we don't ruminate on it like a cow does, which is what the next section is about, which when we don't assimilate it, then it can cause confusion. It can cause a lot of confusion. Studying too much can cause a lot of confusion because different teachers say different things. But that is the whole idea of studying in Vedanta, to study the different views of the different masters and then draw out the quintessence and find that quintessence in their teachings and relate to that. So only, in my understanding, only half study, incomplete study can lead to confusion. Not a complete study. If a person has ruminated properly, if a person has chewed the cud properly, then it shouldn't lead to confusion. So it's a half-truth. Yes, studying too much leads to confusion, but that's just the half-truth. And the same thing is about critical analysis. Yes, our mind and our rational mind has certain limitations, but it should be taken. There comes a point, in the infinite, there comes a point where the truth stops making sense. But at least till that point, we need logical thinking so that any kind of fake belief, wrong belief, blind belief cannot creep in into our journey. So for that, we require critical analysis. Otherwise, misconceptions, confusions, confused understanding, false faiths, false beliefs will flow into our understanding and at some point will misguide us, lead us astray. That's why these two tools are extremely important. At the same time, also understanding their limitation is also important. Using them, a boat can only help us to cross the river. It cannot lead us to our destination beyond that. But at least to cross the river, it is required. If you say that, can this take me to my destination? No, it can only help you cross the river. Then I will not sit in it because it cannot lead, it cannot take me to my destination. That would be stupidity. The same stupidity is there when we discourage study and critical analysis from the very beginning. But somehow what has been said by the masters on a very high level, when the Buddha discourages studying, he's speaking from a very high level, where studying has become meaningless now and it has become more like a trap in itself. That is when he says, that is when the Upanishadic masters say it. But same critical analysis, we just continue without reaching the quintessence and then go beyond, realizing that it has its limitation, then it just goes on and on and on, and there will be no end to it. Then a moment has to come when the master has to declare, Naisha tarkena matirapaneya. This experience cannot be acquired through rational thinking. Come on, sit down, meditate and experience it. Yes, in that moment. But to say this too early, and those who say it too early, I suspect, at times, benefit from it because they need followers. And study and critical analysis does not give them followers. The study and critical analysis makes us our own follower instead of, because if we have been given the light, then why would we hold someone else? If we have been given the eyes, then we will walk on our own. Then why would we try to hold somebody else to walk? And I think the beauty of the Upanishadic teachings is that the Upanishadic masters always emphasize on being autonomous, not heteronomous. Swaraj, which means autonomous, to be one's own king, and not anya rajanaha, not those who have others as their kings, not like those who allow others to lead them, but who lead themselves. Another expression that we find in the Upanishads is ayukta. Ayukta is also a beautiful expression. I like it because it means that somebody who cannot be led by others. So this is ultimately where Vedanta, Advaita Vedanta, the Upanishads, it creates leaders, not followers. That's the point. So, but for that, we have to make use and we have to refine these two tools, speech, mind, and because both of them, where do they exist? They exist in the physical body. That is how we come back to the very foundations of yoga, asana, pranayama, meditation. All these practices are further to refine, to strengthen, to nourish our physical body. And when that physical body gets nourished, then in that our understanding, our mind also gets nourished. So this is the idea. We'll come back to this again in our next session. Any questions? Any? Yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yes. Let me write them down for you. Manas is the inner mind, and by this we really mean this stream of thoughts which is constantly flowing, which contains all the emotions, images, everything that arises, all the feelings and everything, all the experiences as well. So that's manas, that is the inner one, and the intermediate one is prana, which is the life force, the 5 pranas present within the body. And the third one is vaj, means speech. This is a feminine word, this is a masculine word, and this is a neutral word. And where the masters speak of them, they speak in the context of why do we have masculine, feminine, and neuter words for consciousness? Does it mean that is consciousness man, woman, none, or what? Then the master explains that it just because of these 3 manifestations, one is feminine, one is masculine, and one is neutral. So these 3 words are there. Okay. Any other clarification? Might have failed to touch. No? Okay. So then let us conclude. Yes, yes. Huh? Oh, okay. Okay. That's it? Okay. सर्वे भवन्तु सुखिनः सर्वे सन्तु निरामयाः सर्वे भद्राणि पश्यन्तु मा कश्चित् दुःखभाग् भवेत् ॐ शान्तिः 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 My humble salutations to each one of you. Thank you.